Thanks for joining us for your nightly deep dive into all things people, power, and politics. This, my friends, is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. Let's face it, it is for us. It's tough to sift through all those alerts on your phone or posts on social media. What's true? Which friend of yours shared an article, passing it off as real when it's not? We're bringing you the verified truth, like it or not, every night right here. So toss that phone aside and let's roll. As the conflict between Iran and Israel intensifies, President Trump keeps weighing whether the U.S. should get involved. We're hearing from a Jewish American lawmaker and an Arab American journalist on their takes as to what could happen next. And a new face in the crowded Republican race for governor. Former state House Speaker Tom Leonard is in Studio C with his goals for Michigan and his first television appearance since making the big announcement. His message for you coming up. And since we say this show is all about you, let's just actually mean it here and show you what we mean by that. Let's get a pulse check about who you'd vote for if the race were held today. This is not a scientific poll, but I asked you on social media, what are your thoughts? And here's what some of you told me. Ann says Duggan. He's helped so much for Detroit. He would be great for Michigan. Adam says Tom Leonard, proven track record, bipartisan leadership, and statewide office experience being speaker. Paul goes on to say he'd like to see Governor Duggan and Lieutenant Governor Benson. He already gave them the titles. Elena says Jocelyn Benson. She can continue the era of growth and stability that we've enjoyed under the Whitmer administration. And Michelle says Tom Leonard, 100%. He's experienced, has great policy plans, and his campaign will be positive, family-centered, and respectful. Leonard actually released a Facebook video just a few days ago, and so many people reflecting on what they saw there. We'll dive deeper into the race in just about 10 minutes. But we begin tonight with the rising tensions between Iran and Israel. While Israel has been able to take out dozens of nuclear and military sites in Iran, they haven't hit the Fordow nuclear site because it's hundreds of feet underground. President Trump has been adamant about not allowing Iran to get a nuclear weapon. And while the U.S. has bunker buster bombs, those have to be dropped by B-2 bombers flown by American pilots. But there are mixed feelings tonight about whether that should happen.
Look, I want to see someone finish the job, whether it's Israel, whether it's the United States of America.
The idea that one strike is going to be adequate, I think, is a misconception.
This comes as Israel and Iran continue to exchange violent attacks on one another. Iranian missiles striking a major hospital in the southern part of the country and hit a residential building near Tel Aviv. At least 240 people were hurt in those attacks. And at this hour, we know many hospitals are moving patients around frantically underground and have converted parking garages into wards. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visiting that hospital today.
Targeting military sites, we're targeting nuclear sites, we're targeting missile sites. They're targeting a hospital. In this hospital, there are patients who are immobile, they can't even move. Right next to it is a children's ward, a baby's ward, infants. They target it. They can give this nonsense that they're targeting military sites. What military sites? I know all the military sites in Israel. There isn't a military site here for miles and miles around. They're targeting civilians because they're a criminal regime.
President Trump says he'll decide if the United States will directly attack Iran within 2 weeks. And this is a story we will, of course, continue to follow each and every day and night. That's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to political news. So let's pick up the pace and run through some of the other big stories making news right now. TikTok sees the clock extended again. President Trump signing an executive order, keeping the app running for another 90 days as they try to work out a deal, bringing it under American ownership. Will it happen? It's the third time he's extended the deadline since taking office. A law passed by Congress and signed by former President Biden gave the app's owners ByteDance a deadline to sell to an American owner or face a ban in our country. President Trump credits the app with helping him gain traction with young voters. He was actually opposed to the app. And then all of a sudden, when he realized that the app helped him win, he is now for the app. Interesting times. Well, these next two stories impact our state. Starting in West Michigan, Attorney General Dana Nessel and environmental groups both challenging a federal order to keep this coal-fired power plant open. We're talking about the J.H. Campbell plant between Holland and Grand Haven. The environmental groups argue there's no energy emergency justifying this order. Consumers Energy plan to shut it down by the end of May as it transitions to cleaner energy. The Energy Department said it has to stay open until at least late August. A little closer here to home, this woman is trying to flip a competitive district back to blue. This is Bridget Brink. She was U.S. ambassador to Slovakia under President Trump before President Biden nominated her after ambassador to Ukraine during Russia's invasion. She resigned in April, saying in a Detroit Free Press op-ed it was due to President Trump pressuring of Ukraine, not Russia. Brink is running in the 7th District, which covers several counties, including Livingston and parts of Oakland. Congressman Tom Barrett holds this seat right now. He replaced now Senator Alyssa Slotkin. Well, it's been a quieter day of political news because it's a federal holiday, Juneteenth. It's marking the day Union soldiers marched into Galveston, Texas in 1865, telling thousands of enslaved people they were free. This was 2 years after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. As we see pushback on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, historians and activists say we have to acknowledge the past to make sure the future is better.
Lincoln freed the slaves in 1863. It was hard for word to get around. So by 1865, people in Washington decided we needed to send something to Texas so that they knew that the slaves were free.
Celebrating Juneteenth as Emancipation Day also means that we're acknowledging enslavement. So it gives us a chance to reflect on where we've been and where things are going.
President Biden established Juneteenth as a federal holiday during his first year in office back in 2021. But amid the DEI pushback, many events across the country were forced to make changes, saying they lost financial sponsors. All right, turning back to the race for governor after the break. You know what? This man, former House Speaker Tom Leonard, is in Studio C right now to talk about his bid for our state's top job. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Joining us now to talk about his bid for governor, former Republican State House Speaker Tom Leonard. And it's good to see you. And by the way, we're still working to get former AG Mike Cox on to talk about his bid. But all the rest of the candidates who have put their hats in the ring have all been on Fox 2 on The Pulse. And you can watch their interviews on fox2detroit.com. Tom, your first television appearance since making this big announcement.
My first, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you here. And let's begin by asking you the question that I guess so many people would be asking before when someone said, hey, who's Tom Leonard? And they say, oh, well, he was, the former leader there, speaker. He also ran for office. You ran for attorney general not once, but twice, and defeated by Nessel and then defeated by DePerno. Why then try for this?
Well, I'm doing this for 3 reasons, and they're very simple. Hannah, Thomas, and Danny. Those are my 3 kids, my 8-year-old, my 5-year-old, and my soon-to-be 1-year-old. And when you look at the state of this state right now, Roop, the first 2 decades of this century, the only state that we beat for population growth was West Virginia. I'm doing this because my biggest fear is 15 years from now, my little girl is going to come home and she's going to say, Dad, I'd love to stay here, but I've got to move south for better opportunity. And I don't want to get on a plane and have to fly hundreds of miles to be able to see my grandkids and my children.
You know, this has been the story from the time that I've covered the news, from Governor Engler in '96. They were talking about it then. Granholm talked about it. What would you do differently than all of these governors that have already promised the same thing year after year, term after term?
Well, there's no silver bullet. I've said when I'm the next governor, we're going to focus every day on making Michigan a growth state. So number one, we have to make things more affordable. Okay, so when you look at the top 10 growth states in the entire nation, 9 of the 10 either have, or I'm sorry, half of them have either a substantially lower or no income tax. So we got to do something with income taxes. But the one tax that I hear about the most is property taxes. Think of the young family. I mean, you know we have an affordable housing crisis in this state right now, and then property taxes continue to be on the rise. Think of being the young family. You just got married, 60, 70% of your income is going to that mortgage, going to property taxes. Think of the stress that puts on a young couple. No more date nights, they can't go on vacation, but most importantly, they can't start a family. Think of senior citizens that no longer know if they're gonna be able to stay in their homes. So we've got to do something with property taxes as well.
Governor Whitmer went to the White House not once, but 3 times in the last 6 months or so. President Trump now twice has said Governor Whitmer has done an excellent job in the state of Michigan and she's a good woman. Do you agree with the president?
Well, let me say this about this campaign. One of the big reasons we're in here is that, or we're in this race now, is I did not see a candidate that was looking forward with a positive vision and a positive message. What I told my team is, I said, listen, this is the way we're going to handle this campaign. When I'm the next governor, we're going to govern the same way. We're going to adopt the Dan Campbell approach. When he was hired as coach of the Lions, and he took that and he stood there for that first press conference, he didn't look at 2 or 3 decades of failure. He said, by gosh, with grit, with a lot of hard work, with a lot of determination and putting together the right team, we're going to turn this program around. That's exactly what we're going to do with this state. If Dan Campbell could turn the Lions around, we can turn the state of Michigan around, but we're going to do it with a positive vision, not looking back, focused on solving problems.
But you have to know what happened in the past, and I guess I'm asking specifically about President Trump's assessment of Governor Whitmer's performance, saying she's done an excellent job in the state of Michigan. Would you agree with the president on that?
So I would say no. And I would say looking forward, right to work should still be the law of the state. That should have never been repealed. But also, there should be a much bigger emphasis on 3rd grade reading. Less than 40% of our children in this state can read, 3rd graders can read at a proficient level. Only 11% in Detroit public schools. That is going to be one of the biggest tenets and one of the biggest things that I'm going to do everything I can to tackle every day as the state's next governor. Because listen, if these kids cannot read, I was a former prosecutor. If a child cannot read, you are creating a pipeline to a welfare check or a prison cell. We have got to resolve this 3rd grade reading crisis.
We got to resolve the political temperature issue that we're having in this country as well. I have to ask you the question, though, because so many out there, I interviewed somebody who is well known, S.E. Cupp, not long ago, who's a political commentator, and she said, I'm a conservative. I'm not sure if you know what that means anymore, but she's not a Trump loyalist. When you look at yourself and your political brand, would you say you are a old school conservative, or are you more of a MAGA brand person?
I certainly support this president. I support his policies. I've been very clear about that. I mean, listen, on immigration, on tariffs, on crime.
Big beautiful bill?
I've been a strong, yes, big beautiful bill. I mean, listen, more border security, making these tax cuts permanent. Absolutely, I would support that.
What about the Medicaid cuts that they're talking about in there? Would you support that if you were governor?
Ensuring that able-bodied adults are seeking employment or at least doing community service, yes, I support that 100%.
You believe in government accountability. That's something that you really are passionate about. What does that mean to you when you hear those words?
And when I say government accountability, I mean hold me accountable, hold the executive accountable. One of the things that I want to do is double the staff of the Office of Auditor General. That is the nonprofit office that investigates government every day. That is the same office that found out that this governor had spent $10 billion on unemployment claims that should not have been paid. That this was the same governor that misreported nursing home deaths during COVID by 40%. I want to double that staff because I want my directors to know that every single day when they walk into the office, they better be on their A game, because if they fumble the football, there's going to be an investigator that's going to pick it up and they're going to score.
It's a crowded field right now. How secure do you feel when you have John James, Mike Cox, Eric Nesbitt, Duggan, Benson, Gilchrist, Swanson, all of those big names? Who is it on this list that you most agree with, and who is it on the list that you'd like to see defeated?
Listen, I'm all about working as hard as I can and presenting my vision as Tom Leonard. Everything else can work itself out. I'm going to stay focused on our campaign, looking forward, solving problems with a positive vision every day. That's why we're in this race. That's what's going to make my kids proud, and that's why I'm doing this.
When you talk to your kids, you talked about your kids, we'll end the interview the same way. What would be something that you would tell them that you want Michigan to look like in 4 years, 8 years, 10 years?
In 10, 15 years, I want Michigan to be the easiest place in the entire country to find a job. I want every single child or every single young adult that's graduating college, if they want to stay here, they can stay here, and if they want to move here, they can move here. I want this to be the most successful and the biggest growth state in the entire country. We can do it.
Tom Leonard, running for governor of the state of Michigan, here on The Pulse, making your first TV appearance. We thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time here today.
Thank you.
And we ask again, Mike Cox and his team, if you're watching this, we're still asking Mike Cox to come on the set here. He's the only one remaining who we have not interviewed who's running for governor, Democrat or Republican, and independent. We're turning back to the Israel-Iran conflict after the break. A Jewish-American lawmaker, an Arab-American journalist on what needs to happen. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show, The Pulse. Here now to talk about the conflict between Israel and Iran, State Representative Noah Arbit, a Jewish American, and Arab American news publisher Osama Sablani, two regulars on our show that we always count on to give us some interesting perspectives, and we thank you both for joining us here on The Pulse. This is a really complicated one. During the commercial break, we were actually talking about how this is not a cut and dry thing. And Noah, you pointed something out, Representative Arbit, that I thought was interesting, and I think it's just so cogent and true. You don't know what's going to happen in this Iran-Israel conflict because the decisions that could impact the future of the trajectory haven't been made yet.
Yeah, and I think the real issue here is that we're sort of being led by two individuals, in Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, that don't have a lot of trust with the American people broadly on this issue. And Donald Trump, unfortunately, has completely eviscerated the normal national security process that you would usually go through in order to decide whether or not to engage in a conflict like this. The entire, just hollowing out of the National Security Council, having Marco Rubio be Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, does not instill confidence that they have thought through, what the next step is going to be. I don't think anyone has any doubt that, if we deploy these bunker buster bombs on the Fordow nuclear facility in Iran, that will really help impede the nuclear program. But what happens after that? What happens if Iran decides to target, through its militias in Iraq, American forces? What happens if they decide to, bomb our base in Bahrain? What is going to happen, and what is the Trump administration prepared to do? Those are all the questions that I have, and I know that the American people have, and rightfully so.
Well, with respect to Representative Arbit, the first time around when President Trump was in office, he was someone who says he was an anti-war president, and he said that, and he still says that.
He does.
If he can try to keep the peace and try to work with the players in the way that the United States can through diplomacy, then he would like to not see the U.S. get involved. Osama Sablani, do you believe that that's going to happen? Do you think the U.S. will enter this fight?
I think you can continue the conversation with him because I agree with him 100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think that, there is no trust right now in the world and among Americans of what's happening. And there are certain polls that I've looked at. Most of the polls, more than 60%, 50 to 60%, they disagree with what Trump is doing, the president.
What part of the piece, if I may, because I want to ask you a question. Do you believe, Osama, that most Americans who are watching, most Detroiters on the other side of the screen, are thinking about the fact that Marco Rubio has a dual role and how that changes the dynamic of how he may be effective? Or do you think they're really thinking about President Trump? Does he like war? Does he not like war? Isn't that how people are bringing it?
I think that the president has selected his friends and the people who give him the nod, not the people who give him the best advice. And that is the problem. That is the problem. Like when Tulsi Gabbard said that on March 26th, before the Congress, that Iran does not have any nuclear warheads, and there is no intention there that we see that there is any kind of a, direction in that way. What did he say? I don't care what she says. The president said, I don't care what you say. That's the director of your national intelligence. So I think the problem in here is not in Marco Rubio or in Tulsi Gabbard. The problem is with the president of the United States, because every day he gets up, we don't know which direction he's going.
Right.
Well, and it changes.
Confusing the hell out of us.
It changes with the wind, whether it be about tariffs or the war. Certainly, that's something that he has been told about. Do you regret your support in retrospect of who you chose to be the president of the United States?
I did not choose any. I did not endorse either one of them. Frankly, I did not endorse Kamala Harris because Kamala Harris didn't do anything in order to gain our endorsement. In the fact that she did not come, she did not talk, she did not have a conversation, and that she was following President Biden's footsteps. And I did not agree with the president on many issues, including the fight in Gaza.
Let's talk about what Khamenei, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, as they say, of Iran, is saying there's going to be irreparable consequences should the U.S. be involved with this at all. Talking about, again, U.S. military bases being bombed. How much credence and trust do you put in the Iran that we see today based on how much power they have now compared to what they had before?
So I think what starts with this is that the whole reason behind the escalation right now is that October 7th, the attack, the Hamas attack, and I think it's important that people understand, Hamas and Hezbollah are the two proxy forces that Iran has funded and armed and weaponized to go after Israel and American forces in the region, based in Lebanon as well as in Gaza. And what happened after October 7th, the biggest strategic catastrophe for Iran and for Hamas and Hezbollah is that Israel so degraded Hamas and Hezbollah's ability to move against Israel, to attack Israel. Those were Iran's tripwire defense forces, so that way they could deter an Israeli attack against Iran. Now, Iran has, Israeli intelligence, dictated and showed this, that they were racing towards a bomb because their deterrent capacities through Hamas and Hezbollah had been so substantially degraded. Now, I think the problem is again, like we said, we don't know that we can trust these two leaders, what they're walking us into. But the idea that Iran's nuclear program does pose an existential threat not only to Israel, but to the United States, I think is uncontested. The idea that you have a regime whose governing ideology is death to America and death to Israel is not somehow in our interest to erode their capability is ridiculous. But to answer your question about the Ayatollah, I think the problem is when you press a regime whose back is up against the wall, they cannot win this fight. They cannot win this war. They cannot beat Israel, and they cannot beat the United States. But that means a reckless regime who has its own survival to worry about may act dangerously and recklessly against us.
And that's when we talk about, in political science, when we talk about rational leadership. If you're a rational leader, you do things based on a calculus. But if you already have your neck against being strung up and you're against the wall, then you worry about what someone may do. Are you concerned about that, Osama?
Yes, I am very concerned, but I think that there is a fundamental issue in here. There is a struggle between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And unless we address this issue in a way that we resolve it, this is going to continue.
But that's not why Iran is against Israel.
There's never a solution for a crisis by one killing the other. It doesn't exist.
I don't think that this has anything to do with Palestinians, respectfully.
No, it has a lot to do with it. It is the pretext of all the conflict.
No, the Islamic Republic has been opposed to a Jewish state in that region because they are fundamentally anti-Semitic, not because of treatment of Palestinians or because Palestinians deserve their own state. That is not the ideology of the Islamic Republic.
But there are many Jews in the Iranian government and in Iran than Israel.
Okay, if we may, just for a moment,
don't use the anti-Semitic as
the Islamic Republic
there is a fundamental
anti-Semitic
problem in the Middle East that has been brewing for 76 years, even before the Islamic Republic became an Islamic Republic during the Shah. So there was a problem there.
And I'll remind both of you that when you take the Palestine-Israel conflict out for a moment, you think about Ahmadinejad back in early 2000s.
Holocaust denial.
Well, but beyond that, death to America,
death to Israel.
And death to Israel.
I'm totally against these things.
Of course you are. But I'm saying
the problem here is not the slogans. It's the action.
The slogans are the policy.
Well, the slogan, if you look at the slogan of what Netanyahu is saying, is even worse. Netanyahu is acting.
Again, Israel has targeted military sites. It has not targeted civilian sites, as opposed to Iran. Iran has been targeting civilian sites.
They killed
in Tel
tens of
Aviv,
thousands of
in
Palestinians.
Come on. We know that there is truth to
both.
What you both are saying.
I'm talking about Iran and Israel. Right?
No, I'm talking about Israel killed so many innocent people in Gaza.
Osama Sablani. No, Arbit, we're not going to adjudicate all of it right here because this is vested in a lot of history and a lot of fervor and a lot of
But we have a lot
reasoning.
in common in here.
And I know you do. And we began that way, and we'll remind you that is a way to have a discussion in a way that you can listen to each other as you both did. And we thank you both for doing that. Representative Arbit, Osama Sablani, come back and talk to us again. That is the Pulse for tonight. Remember to email us your political questions you want answered or a fact check you want to see. The Pulse at Fox.com, or you can scan the QR code on your screen. I'm Roop Raj. As always, it was good to be with you.
Yeah.